the department with financial audits, you're able to have efficiencies so that you can do more performance audits. After that's all said and done, will you be reducing your budget in total?
I would imagine that almost everyone in state government right now has to reduce their budget, and I think everyone should be prepared for that. That's what, a difference between myself and Lewis, by the way, is he simply has supported legislation that all these agencies would just pay a fee for mandated audits. So what he's proposed is frankly a massive expansion of the state auditor's office. My approach is different. It's saying, no, I got to do what everyone else does, live within limited means, and I will add to one performance audit budget by reducing from others. And I've been very clear on that. And I can't imagine that any office, including state auditor, will be seeing an increased budget. I mean, we got an $8 million deficit.
Right, well you get $8 billion you're not going to get from the federal government.
Right, and as you can tell from my track record, I'm not afraid to deal with lower budgets. That's what I've been doing for years.
Do you have some ideas where you might find those savings within the auditor's office?
Yeah, as I said, I mean, believe it or not, Mary Taylor's not giving me a tour yet, so I haven't gotten all the ins and outs. But from talking to people who know the office, from private firms who do the same or similar work, there's clear consensus that there are a lot of efficiencies by modernizing the operation. That you bring in the right technologies, you go paperless, you do it the right way, you clean up some other areas, and I think there are significant savings.
If you're able to accomplish these performance audits and it points to a lot of inefficiencies in a particular area of a community, then how do you accomplish change?
Well, first, I think if you do this the right way, having a transparent, clear report with clear recommendations, get it out there. And get it out there with the media, get it out there with the citizens, and do it in a way that the officials aren't defensive about it, but will embrace it. And my style has always been one that I've been able to work across party lines to get things done. Not an in-your-face thing that makes people defensive, but hey guys, these are changes that will save you a lot of money. And guess what? Part of the goal here is you find efficiencies that make that are better than the alternative of just cutting services. And a lot of the challenge here is if you don't do a performance audit, and the governments just kind of keep going as they're going, and then the next year the revenues are down, they'll just make blanket cuts to service, which is far worse. So if you explain what the alternative is, which is worse than some of the savings you'll find, and then I do think you got to play a strong role to make sure that these are not reports on the shelf. That after the fact, and Dave Yost has proposed legislation, and again, I don't run for this sitting around assuming the legislature is going to, do much. I mean, look at Columbus right now; not a lot happens, but I'm okay with the legislation. But if it passes and it requires more back-end accountability, great, I support that. But waiting for Columbus to get things done is not really what I'm hoping to do. I think the auditor can directly play a pretty strong role to make sure that if there are recommendations and they make sense, that you stay on top of it after the fact to make sure they get done. Now, when communities are in fiscal crisis, by the way, there's a lot more of a leverage. When they're not, if they just ask for it, then these aren't required. But I do think if they're clear recommendations, if they're well supported, I think the auditor can make a strong case to get them done.
Mary Taylor had a very fine reputation in the private sector as an auditor before she got into politics, and so she I think she brought the tools, the intellectual tools to the job to tackle it very well. And do you have any comparable background to that?
I don't have a CPA, but I have my own, if you go through my profile, I have an extensive history in both the private side and the public side. And as I said, I think the most important experience that someone can bring to the job when the number one thing they're going to be facing is communities who face what I just described is, have you done this yourself? Have you made these tough decisions? Have you balanced budgets? Have you been recognized for some of the practices you put in place? Before Mary Taylor, there was obviously never a CPA before in that job. I've talked to Jim Peach, or I've talked to others. There are all sorts of different kinds of degrees or backgrounds you could bring to this. But I think the most important question is, what have you done when you've been in office? And what I've done in office is precisely what communities are going to have to do if they aren't doing it now. And so that's the experience I think lends itself to this job, particularly at this time. This is not some ordinary time where if we just do a lot of financial audits every year, we feel like we're getting our job done. There's a lot more at stake. There's a lot more work to be done to get government more efficient, to reform government, to, as I said, root out fraud that's happening. And in those areas, I have a very, very strong track record.
Under your pepper plan here, point number 1 is recommending regional cooperation for local governments and school districts. And then point 2 is provide a bully pulpit.
Where's this?
It's off the website.
It's on the
website.
website.
Okay.
And then, provide a bully pulpit for shared services.
Right.
Okay. Virtually every school district in Ohio is in some kind of financial stress.
Right.
And those are the only taxes that, really that voters can vote directly on, and it's very difficult for them. The auditor's office really doesn't have any, jurisdiction over schools. How would you help schools, how would you help school districts with these performance audits? And then also, how would you, if it made sense that, some of these smaller school districts consolidate, how would you, use your office to, basically get better education for less money?
Actually, the auditor audits every school, so it has direct jurisdiction. The auditor is also the one that declares schools in fiscal crisis, which leads to a performance audit. So maybe more directly than a lot of other areas, the auditor has the ability to go in at any time of a regular audit and suggest these kind of changes. But especially at a time where schools in a fiscal crisis, it needs to get out of it. What better time to have someone say, guys, you've tried 4 levies in 4 years. It's not working. You need to think of something different. Here's what's worked elsewhere. Here's the way you might regionalize back office services, merge, you name it. At the moment you're there as auditor is the moment they need the help and they need the new ideas and they need to get out of the fiscal emergency. So that's where there are multiple ways, really all the time, but also at that time where the auditor is literally being looked on as a source of how do they get out of this mess. And they're generally not going to get out of it by doing what they've done before. So you better have some new ideas. So I think it's a real opportunity. I mean, that's the moment where you could be persuasive that you can't keep doing what you're doing, and there are things that have to be done differently. And you know what? In the perfect world, if you had all the money in the world, you probably wouldn't want to do it, but that's not where we are, so you got to make some tough decisions. The auditor can help guide that. By the way, another thing I think the auditor can do that school districts have communicated to folks who've helped me, every time you do a performance audit for one school district, put it out there. Let everyone else read it. There are a lot of ideas each time that shouldn't just be kept in some cave somewhere, but share those ideas to all the other school districts before they get in that fiscal crisis, or before their citizens say enough with tax levies. So there are ways that you could take the work in particular areas and share them elsewhere. And I've been told by school districts they're frustrated because they want to see that kind of performance audit. They want to understand the information, and it's not out there like it should be. So I would do that as well.
Doesn't that same concept apply to almost any other local governments?
Absolutely. Like I said, and I don't mean to always point to these tabs, but both on performance measurement 6 and 7, other state auditors they lay out best practices. They provide an inventory. And I'm someone from the moment I get to city council and county commission, I spend half my time trying to figure out what works somewhere. And I think, and you'd be amazed how hard it is. There's not a lot of that out there. People are too busy. I go to some of the conferences where that happens. The state auditor could be a great resource for any community about, oh, you want to share 911 service? You want to regionalize local tax collection rather than having every single government in a county do their own tax collection process? Well, it's been done here, this is how they did it, and you can save a lot of money, and it's pretty easy to do. I mean, you can be the source of all that information. That's what I hope to. That's one of the things I hope to do with the office. And again, local.
Well, it's probably because a lot of those best practices aren't seen by municipalities or school districts as something that they want to embrace, because unlike the private sector, they don't have a motivation. In the private sector, you either perform or you're out of business.
Right.
In those cases, they just pass on the cost to the taxpayers. So there's not a real built-in incentive for them to embrace your, best practices.
Big picture, you may be right, but right now, I'd say,
Right now.
right
it's
now is the
restricted.
time.
Yeah.
We have a shared services committee in Hamilton County. We sit around a table, county, city, other governments. Probably wouldn't have been able to have one 10 years ago. But right now, it's what do we all do? Could we have a regional fire district that would deliver better service rather than some of you having to literally cut fire service? All of a sudden, in 2010, that's a much more interesting conversation than 10 years ago. So that's why I do think at this unique moment, the auditor can play a role. I agree with you. There's hesitance. I have arrows I'm still pulling on my back from times where I've merged things. We had 2 convention and visitor bureaus in Hamilton County. A Cincinnati one and a northern one. You react like I did. Like, come on guys, why do we need 2? That's about as easy a thing to do together, market, as anything I can imagine. I said, we're not going to keep funding both. We should have one. We'll have better service. And the fight I went through for something that simple was unbelievable. But I stuck to it, and we now have one, and guess what? It's much better. People who initially complained up north, they're like, well, you won't represent us very well if we have one. We won't get the northern exposure, part of the pun, that we need. Within 3 months, they say, can we hurry up this merger? Because this seems a lot better than we've had. So you can do it, but there's a lot of local turf. You fight a lot. And that's where there aren't that many officials who would just stick their neck out like I did on that one, for example. The state auditor can be that person's best supporter, because if you can say to the people interested in doing this, it was done somewhere else and it worked. Here are the numbers to back up what you're doing. If you need someone to tell them you saved X amount or you deliver better service, the state auditor can provide that. I think you can actually be in a supportive role of the officials who are willing to do this work versus just having the few ones out there willing to do it kind of on their own, and normally beaten up so much when they try it that frankly they don't do it. I mean, I'm a pretty independent, feisty person, so I was willing to do it, and I took my lumps. But a lot of other people would just say, oh, I don't want to deal with this. They'd compromise it away or just not do it. The auditor can help be a backstop on a lot of these issues.
We actually have the same thing happening with Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati.